Here we are in the Washington, New Hampshire church, which is this charming old church with its beautiful acoustics. This is a church where Sabbath-keeping Adventists first met, and eventually it became the first Seventh-day Adventist church, a very historic church. This church hasn't changed in many, many years. Still doesn't have electricity. Hasn't changed. But we can't say the same thing for creation. You see, when God created the world, it was a really, really different place than the one we live in now. For one thing, it didn't rain. Now, it's hard for us to imagine a world like that, but we're told in Genesis 2, 5, and 6 that a mist of sorts would rise up from the ground. And it sounds similar to hydroponic systems, which is pretty much the most ideal way of growing plants that's currently known to man. But that wasn't the only difference. Animals were created as vegetarians. Think about that for a moment. They only ate plants, all of them. It says so in Genesis 1, 29 and 30. So yeah, according to Genesis 1, the earth was a really, really different place. These texts, though, are really a challenge to some people, scientists, for instance, or those with a scientific bent of mind. Most scientists who read these texts will respond by saying that we just don't observe in the world what the Bible describes. Well, okay, fair enough. There's herbivores like sheep, horses, and elephants, okay, but dogs, birds, fish, people will be quick to point out that most of these animals were designed to eat other animals. End of discussion. So because there is a disparity between what we see and what the Bible says, scientists are quick, and many people are quick to dismiss the Bible. Far too quick, actually, because there's a very good explanation for this. The Bible goes on to recount how sin entered the world and how that changed the world, literally. Because the consequence of sin is disease, it's suffering, it's conflict, ultimately it's death. So let's take this and think this through a little on our own. And the place to start thinking, this disparity, the place to start thinking is with the character of God. And we know that the character of God is complex. After all, He's God. But we also know it's ultimately simple because God is love. So let's take a look at what we know of God and apply it to the operation of His world. Doing that, we can say that in God's world there's absolutely no fear, no domination, no predation, no suffering, no disease, no parasites. That would mean that animals eat plants and seeds, as the Bible says was originally the case. It would also mean that some plants and maybe even some animals would produce specialized food for other animals. In other words, they would produce a blessing. Filter feeders comes to mind. Animals producing food for filter feeders. But so far we've only defined God's world by what is absent, fear and predation and such, and not by what is present. So let's add to our model, and to do that we need to again turn to the character of God. Based on what we know of God, we can say that His world would involve generosity and mutual care. Sharing, if you will. Each life form would provide a blessing to other life forms. Essentially, to get to God's world, you have to reverse part of the world as we know it, a substantial part of the world. In our world, which is fundamentally based on selfishness, most everything takes. But in a world without sin, in a world based on the character of God, everything would give. Now, taking what we know of the character of Satan, we can see that the current earth functions more or less as a pyramid, with the bottom of the pyramid giving the most and the benefits flowing to the top of the pyramid. The powerful take and the powerless give. We see this model throughout the natural world, we see the food chain, but we also see it throughout human society, human economy, where every level of the pyramid takes from the levels below it. By applying what we know of God, we can see that we take this model and we invert it, where the pyramid is upside down, where everything blesses and gives to everything else, and where goodness flows from the stronger to the weaker, which is to say, God gives more than anything or anyone else. This model, this upside-down pyramid, this blessings flowing, is consistent with what we know of the character of God. For a world like this to work, all life forms on it would have to be returned from their current twisted and perverted states back to their original created states. At the same time, plants would have to be returned to their original state. In fact, everything would have to be returned to its original state, and that is exactly what God says He'll do in Revelation 21:1, when the earth is created new, without any trace or stain of sin. What we'll see is a complete elimination of the selfishness paradigm. There won't be one thing that just takes. And what we will see is a pure expression of the loving kindness paradigm. The result of that is given in Isaiah 11:9, where it says, referring to the new earth, "They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain." An earth that isn't a battlefield, to me that just sounds really, really good. I mean, really good. In the next video in this series, we'll look at the selfishness paradigm as reflected in our lives, our work, our play, our money, our egos. We're going to look at all of that. And we'll briefly explore some of the truly critical questions about how Christians relate to a world that operates on the selfishness paradigm, including this question: how can Christians live out the character of God, constantly give in a world that only wants to take? Join me in the next video.